The wagon wheels groaned under the weight of fresh-cut timber as Sarah McKenna urged her 2 oxen forward through the Oklahoma Territory dust, her calloused hands gripping the reins while sweat traced lines down her sun-browned face in the oppressive August heat of 1884. She had been making this journey alone for 3 weeks now, hauling load after load from the sawmill 15 miles east to the patch of land she had claimed near the Canadian River, and every muscle in her 22-year-old body screamed for rest, but she refused to stop because this house would be her independence, her future, her proof that a woman could build something lasting without a man's name attached to it. The land had cost her 5 years of wages saved from teaching school in Arkansas, and the timber was taking every cent she had earned working nights as a seamstress for the wives of Fort Reno officers. But Sarah McKenna had never been one to let impossibility stand in her way. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when she spotted riders approaching from the west, 3 men on horseback moving at an easy canter across the prairie grass. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped beside her on the wagon seat, though she did not lift it. Out here, you learn to be cautious but not hostile, to read a situation before committing to action. As the riders drew closer, she could make out more details. The man in the front sat tall in his saddle, wearing a dusty brown hat and a blue shirt that had seen better days. His 2 companions flanked him slightly behind, and all 3 had the weathered look of men who spent their lives outdoors. The lead rider raised his hand in greeting and slowed his horse to match the pace of her wagon. "Afternoon, miss," he called out, his voice carrying a Texas drawl that spoke of somewhere farther south. "That is a mighty heavy load you are pulling there." Sarah kept her eyes forward but nodded acknowledgement. "It is my load to pull." "No doubt about that," the cowboy said, and she caught the hint of a smile in his voice. "Name is Jacob Reeves. My crew and I have been trailing a herd up from Fort Worth, delivered them to Fort Reno yesterday. Saw you pass by the Fort Road 3 times this past week, always heading back east empty and returning west loaded down. Cannot help but wonder what you are building." She glanced at him then, really looked at him. Jacob Reeves appeared to be somewhere in his mid-20s, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and gray eyes that held curiosity rather than mockery. His face was honest, she decided, the kind that had not yet learned to hide what he thought. "A house," she said simply. "On my land 2 miles west of here." "All by yourself?" One of the other cowboys, a stocky man with red hair, spoke up. "Begging your pardon, miss, but that is a considerable undertaking for one person." "I have hands that work and a mind that plans," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion tugging at her bones. "That is sufficient." Jacob rode in silence for a moment, studying the load of timber, then looking ahead at the vast openness of the territory. "How many more loads do you need?" 2 more after this one," Sarah admitted, wondering why she was telling him. Perhaps because speaking it aloud made it feel more manageable, or perhaps because there was something in his manner that did not feel like prying. "Then I can begin construction." "And you aim to raise the frame yourself as well?" Jacob asked, and now there was concern rather than doubt in his tone. "I will manage," Sarah said, though the truth was she had been lying awake at night trying to figure out exactly how one person could lift and secure the heavy beams that would form the skeleton of her house. She had considered using a pulley system, perhaps enlisting help from the Johnsons who homesteaded 5 miles north, though they had 6 children to feed and little time for neighborly assistance. Jacob exchanged glances with his companions, some unspoken conversation passing between them. "Miss, my crew finished our drive yesterday. We have been working steady for 4 months and plan to rest in Darlington for a spell before heading back to Texas. But I have 6 good men sitting idle, and we know our way around construction. If you would permit it, we could help you raise that frame once you get all your timber hauled." Sarah pulled the oxen to a stop, turning to look at Jacob directly. "I cannot pay you. Every dollar I have is spoken for in materials and supplies." "Did not ask for payment," Jacob said, his gray eyes steady on hers. "Sometimes a person just needs a hand, and sometimes other people have hands free to offer. No debt, no obligation, Just neighbors helping neighbors, even if we are just passing through. She wanted to refuse. Pride had been her constant companion since her father died 4 years ago and left her with nothing but his debts. Pride had pushed her to work 2 jobs to save every penny to file her own claim when she turned 21. Pride had carried her through the condescending smiles of the land office clerks and the outright laughter of the timber merchant until she showed him her money counted out in neat stacks. But pride, Sarah was beginning to learn, could also be a kind of foolishness when it stood between you and genuine help. "Why would you do this?" she asked, searching his face for hidden motives. "You do not know me." Jacob leaned forward slightly in his saddle, resting his forearm on the horn. "My mother was widowed when I was 12 years old. She had 5 children and a ranch outside of San Antonio that everyone said she should sell. Neighbors came together and helped her keep it running until my brothers and I were old enough to take over the work. She taught me that when you see someone fighting a hard fight with honor, you step in if you can. You are hauling that timber with determination I can respect. And raising a frame alone is dangerous. I would not leave a fellow human being to risk breaking their neck when I have men and knowledge standing idle." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, some tight knot of constant vigilance loosening just a fraction. 2 miles west," she said, "there is a marker stone where I have been stacking the timber. If your offer is genuine, I would be grateful for the help." The smile that crossed Jacob Reeves's face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie, warm and unguarded. "It is genuine, miss. You have my word." "Sarah," she said, "Sarah McKenna." "Well, Miss Sarah McKenna, you just keep hauling your timber, and when you are ready to build, you send word to the Darlington Hotel. We will be there." He tipped his hat. His companions did the same, and they rode off toward the small settlement that served the fort, leaving Sarah alone with her wagon and her thoughts. She clicked her tongue to get the oxen moving again, but her mind was far from the familiar routine of the journey. There had been no jest in Jacob Reeves's voice, no condescension in his manner. He had spoken to her as an equal, had offered help without trying to take over her project or diminish her capability. It was so rare that Sarah found herself replaying the conversation, examining it for flaws she might have missed. She reached her land as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. The marker stone stood proud, and beside it her carefully stacked timber represented weeks of brutal labor. This piece of earth was hers, legally filed and recorded 160 acres of Oklahoma Territory prairie with a good creek running through the northwest corner and enough timber along the banks to supplement what she had purchased. The house she planned would be simple but solid. 2 rooms to start with the framework laid for expansion later. She would prove that a woman alone could not only survive but thrive, could build something permanent in a land that seemed determined to remain wild. Sarah unloaded the timber as the stars emerged, her arms shaking with fatigue. She fed and watered the oxen, made herself a cold supper of bread and dried beef, and rolled out her bedding beneath the wagon as she had done every night since beginning this venture. Sleep came quickly, but her dreams were troubled by images of walls rising and falling, of timber too heavy to lift, and of gray eyes that seemed to see past all her carefully constructed defenses. The next morning brought another journey to the sawmill, another day of loading and hauling, another evening of unloading alone. The routine had become meditation, each movement practiced and efficient. On the 3rd day, as she made her final trip from the sawmill, Sarah allowed herself to feel the weight of accomplishment. Every piece of timber she needed now rested on her land. The foundation stones had been laid weeks ago in the pattern she had sketched and re-sketched 100 times. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. She camped that night at her land and rose before dawn to ride one of the oxen into Darlington, feeling foolish and hopeful in equal measure. The hotel was a 2-story structure that optimistically claimed elegance but delivered simple frontier functionality. Sarah tied her ox to the rail and entered the dim lobby where a clerk dozed behind a scarred wooden counter. I am looking for Jacob Reeves, she said, and the clerk jerked awake, blinking at her in confusion before comprehension settled in. Room 7 upstairs, Wam, he said. Though it is barely past sunrise, miss. He will want to know I am here, Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. She climbed the narrow stairs and knocked on the door marked with a crooked number 7. For a long moment there was silence, and Sarah began to think perhaps she had misjudged everything. Perhaps Jacob's offer had been nothing more than polite conversation he never expected her to accept. Then the door opened, and Jacob stood there in stocking feet and suspenders hanging loose over his shirt, hair disheveled from sleep, looking surprised and pleased. Miss McKenna, he said, fully alert despite the early hour. You finished hauling? Last load arrived yesterday evening, Sarah confirmed. If your offer still stands, I am ready to begin raising the frame. Give me 10 minutes to gather the crew, Jacob said. We will meet you at your land. He was true to his word. Sarah had barely returned to her property when riders appeared on the horizon. 7 men total counting Jacob. They arrived with tools strapped to their saddles, hammers and saws and levels, the equipment of construction. Jacob made introductions as the crew dismounted. There was Red Sullivan, the stocky redhead she had met before, and his brother Patrick, who was tall and thin as a fence post. Miguel Cortez had kind eyes and hands that moved with practiced ease as he unloaded rope from his saddle. Thomas Creek was a Cherokee man who spoke little but seemed to assess everything with a sharp, calculating gaze. James Hartley was barely 20 with an eager expression and shoulders built for heavy lifting. Finally, there was an older man named Samuel Brooks, whose gray beard and steady manner suggested he had forgotten more about building than most men ever learned. Sam here worked as a carpenter before he took up cowboying, Jacob explained. He has been studying your timber stack and foundation since we rode up. Sam, what are you thinking? Samuel walked around the foundation stones, measuring with his eyes and occasionally dropping to one knee to sight along the layout. She planned it well, he said, and Sarah felt absurd pride at the approval in his voice. Foundation is level and square. Timber is good quality, properly cut. You have your design drawn out, Miss McKenna? Sarah pulled the folded papers from her satchel, sketches she had made, and remade until the dimensions and joinery were clear in her mind. Samuel studied them with the intensity of a scholar reading scripture, occasionally nodding or making a small sound of approval. This will work, he pronounced finally. You have a good understanding of load-bearing structure. We can have your frame raised by sundown if we start now. What followed was a dance of coordinated effort that left Sarah breathless with its efficiency. Samuel directed the placement of the main support beams while Thomas and Miguel worked together to prepare the joinery, their hands moving in silent synchronization. Jacob and James lifted timber that Sarah had struggled to drag, making it look effortless as they positioned each piece according to Samuel's instructions. Red and Patrick worked on securing the joints, their hammers ringing out an alternating rhythm that sounded almost musical. Sarah found herself swept into the current of activity, holding beams steady while they were secured, passing tools, mixing batches of nails from her carefully hoarded supplies. Jacob worked beside her often, and she noticed how he moved with both strength and care, how he double-checked every connection before moving to the next, how he quietly corrected James when the younger man's enthusiasm outpaced his precision. You have done this before, Sarah observed during a brief water break, watching Jacob examine a joint that Thomas had just completed. My family ranch required constant maintenance, Jacob replied, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. I learned early that a structure is only as strong as its weakest connection. Every beam matters, every nail counts. You build it right the first time, or you build it again later, usually after something has failed at the worst possible moment. That is why you checked my foundation before agreeing to help, Sarah said, understanding dawning. You wanted to make sure I had not made critical errors that would doom everything built on top. Jacob met her eyes, and there was respect in his gaze. Your foundation is perfect, Sarah. You clearly researched and planned. Most people rush in without understanding that preparation determines success. You did the work to understand what you were undertaking. The way he said her name, without the formal misattached, felt intimate somehow, like a door opening between them. Sarah felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the August sun beating down on them. She turned away quickly, taking a long drink from her canteen to hide her confusion. By midday, the main support beams stood upright, braced and secured in a skeleton that traced the outline of her house against the sky. Sarah stood staring at it, overwhelmed by the sight. For months, this structure had existed only in her imagination and on paper. Now it was real, tangible, rising from the earth in defiant statement that she belonged here, that she could create something lasting. "It is really happening," she whispered, unaware she had spoken aloud until Jacob appeared at her shoulder. "You made it happen," he said quietly. "You bought the land, planned the structure, hauled every piece of timber. We're just helping you lift what you prepared. This house is yours, Sarah. Your vision, your work, your future." She turned to look at him. This cowboy who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to speak. "Why do you care so much about making sure I know that?" she asked. "Most men would want credit, would need me to acknowledge their contribution as the important part." Jacob was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the rising frame. "I have seen too many women have their work erased, their contributions forgotten or attributed to men who happened to be standing nearby. My mother kept our ranch running for 6 years essentially alone, but people still referred to it as my father's ranch, as if his memory was doing the work rather than her hands. I will not do that to you. This is your house, and anyone who asks will be told exactly that." Something cracked open inside Sarah's chest, some wall she had built around her heart during all the years of fighting to be taken seriously, to be seen as capable rather than merely stubborn. She had thought she wanted to do this entirely alone, had believed that accepting help would diminish her achievement. But Jacob was showing her a different truth. The house was hers because she had conceived and planned and prepared for it. The help freely given did not erase her ownership, but rather demonstrated that strength could exist alongside community, that independence did not require isolation. "Thank you," she said. And the words carried weight beyond simple politeness. "For understanding what this means." "I see you, Sarah McKenna," Jacob said. And the simple declaration felt like the most profound thing anyone had ever said to her. The afternoon brought the cross beams and roof supports, each piece fitting together in the elegant logic of good design. Samuel called out measurements and angles while the crew worked in practiced harmony. Sarah climbed up to help secure the higher beams, her lack of fear at heights earning appreciative comments from the men. She had spent too much of her childhood climbing trees and barn rafters to be bothered by elevation. She found herself working beside Jacob again as they positioned a particularly long beam that would form part of the roof support. Their hands brushed as they both reached to steady the timber, and Sarah felt electricity jump between them, sharp and undeniable. Jacob's eyes met hers, and she saw her own surprise reflected there, along with something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "Steady there," Samuel called up. "Jacob, shift your end about 3 inches south." The moment broke, and they returned to the work. But Sarah remained acutely aware of Jacob's presence, of the competent strength in his hands, of the way he moved with easy grace despite the demanding physical labor. She noticed other things too. The way he praised James when the young man completed a difficult task, the way he listened when Thomas suggested a modification to their approach, the way he made sure everyone drank water and rested periodically despite their eagerness to continue. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Samuel stepped back and surveyed their work with a critical eye. "That is a solid frame," he announced. "Well built and true. You have the bones of a fine house here, Miss McKenna." Sarah stood looking at the structure, hardly able to believe that this morning there had been only stacked timber and bare foundation stones. Now walls outlined her future, roof supports promised shelter. The whole frame stood strong and square, exactly as she had envisioned it. Emotion welled up sudden and fierce, tears blurring her vision despite her attempts to blink them away. "Sarah?" Jacob's voice was soft with concern. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she managed, laughing even as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Everything is right. I have been alone for so long, fighting for every inch of progress. And today you all gave me this gift of your labor and skill. I do not know how to thank you properly." "You already did," Red Sullivan said, his usually boisterous voice gentle. "You let us help. That is thanks enough." "Though we would not turn down supper if you have supplies," Patrick added with a grin. "Building houses makes a man powerful hungry." Sarah did have supplies, the dried beef and beans and coffee she had been rationing carefully for weeks. She set about making a meal while the men secured their tools and built up her cooking fire. It was not fancy fare, but she noticed they ate with genuine appreciation, sitting around the fire as darkness settled over the prairie and stars emerged in glorious profusion overhead. Talk wandered through various topics. Miguel spoke of his family's ranch in New Mexico territory and his hopes of returning there soon. Thomas described the changes he had seen in Oklahoma territory since the land runs began, his tones suggesting mixed feelings about the transformation. James admitted this was his first cattle drive and that he was still learning what kind of life he wanted to build. Red and Patrick swapped exaggerated stories of their adventures that made everyone laugh despite the transparent embellishment. Samuel talked about his wife who had passed from influenza 3 winters ago, his voice carrying love and loss in equal measure. "We had 32 good years," he said, staring into the fire. "Built 3 houses together, raised 4 children. I miss her every day, but I do not regret a single moment. When you find someone who makes you better than you are alone, you hold on tight and build something beautiful together." Sarah felt Jacob's eyes on her during Samuel's story, felt the weight of unspoken possibility hanging in the air between them. She should have felt frightened by the intensity of what was developing between them. They had met only days ago, and he would be leaving soon to return to Texas. But instead of fear, Sarah felt a strange certainty settling into her bones, as if some part of her recognized Jacob Reeves as someone important, someone who could change the trajectory of her life if she was brave enough to let him. "What about you, Jacob?" James asked. "You ever think about settling down, or are you married to the trail?" Jacob took a long drink of coffee before answering, his face thoughtful in the firelight. "I have been on the move for 5 years now, working different ranches, going where the jobs take me. It has been good work, honest work, but lately I have found myself thinking about putting down roots somewhere, building something permanent instead of just passing through other people's places." "What stops you?" Sarah asked, surprising herself by speaking the question aloud. Jacob looked at her across the fire, his gray eyes serious. "I guess I have been waiting to find the right reason to stay in one place, the right purpose, the right land." He paused, and his voice dropped lower. "The right person." The conversation moved on, but Sarah barely heard it, too aware of her own heartbeat, of the way her body felt electrified and terrified simultaneously. She had come to Oklahoma territory to build an independent life, to prove she needed nothing and no one. But Jacob was making her question whether independence had to mean isolation, whether strength required shouldering every burden alone. The crew eventually rolled out bedrolls around the fire, planning to sleep under the stars and head back to Darlington in the morning. Sarah retreated to her usual spot beneath her wagon, but sleep eluded her. She lay staring up at the underside of the wagon bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the camp settling, and replayed every conversation with Jacob, searching for truth in his words and intentions. She must have eventually dozed because she woke to pre-dawn grayness and the smell of fresh coffee. Jacob crouched by the fire, feeding small sticks into the flames and watching the pot come to a boil. Sarah crawled out from under her wagon, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill, and joined him. "Could not sleep?" she asked quietly, not wanting to wake the others. "I am usually up before dawn," Jacob said. "Old habit from ranch work. There is something peaceful about this hour, the world balanced between darkness and light." They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping coffee as the sky gradually brightened. Sarah watched the frame of her house emerge from the shadows, its strong lines a promise of shelter and permanence. She felt Jacob watching her rather than the house. "What happens now?" he asked. "With the building, I mean. Do you have plans for walls and roof?" "I have been saving for milled lumber for the walls," Sarah said, "but that is still a month away at least, maybe more. For now, I can begin work on the interior supports, the floor joists. There is plenty I can do alone while I save for the next phase." "And then?" Jacob pressed. "After the house is built, what is your plan?" Sarah considered the question, thinking about the future she had mapped out during long nights of planning. "I will cultivate some of the land, put in a vegetable garden, and maybe wheat. I can take in sewing work, possibly teach children of nearby homesteaders. It will be a hard life, but it will be mine. I will answer to no one, depend on no one, owe no one. That freedom is worth the struggle." "That sounds lonely," Jacob said, and there was no judgment in his voice, only observation. "Perhaps," Sarah admitted, "but loneliness is safer than disappointment. People leave or die or prove unreliable. Land stays. A house built solid will stand. I can trust in what I create with my own hands." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "My father died when I was 12, he said finally. "Kicked by a horse, wrong place at the wrong time, gone in an instant. I watched my mother struggle with that loss, saw how it nearly broke her. But you know what I also saw? I saw neighbors who showed up every day for months to help. I saw her lean on community and come out the other side stronger. She was lonely for my father until the day she died, but she was not alone. There is a difference." "You think I'm making a mistake," Sarah said, "building this isolated life." "I think you are building something impressive," Jacob corrected. "But I also think maybe you are building walls higher than they need to be. Not everyone leaves, Sarah. Not everyone disappoints." She wanted to argue, to defend the choices that had brought her to this point, but the words caught in her throat. Because Jacob had not disappointed her. He had appeared exactly when she needed help, had given freely without expectation, had seen her capability and honored it while still offering support. He was proving himself different from the men who had dismissed or patronized her, and that difference terrified her because it meant she might have to reconsider her certainties about facing life alone. The rest of the crew began stirring, and the moment of intimacy dissolved into the practical bustle of men preparing to depart. They saddled horses and gathered tools, making ready for the ride back to Darlington. Sarah stood by her incomplete house, feeling the weight of goodbye pressing down on her chest. "We will be in town for another week at least," Jacob said as he tightened his saddle cinch. "If you need anything or just want company, you know where to find us." "I appreciate everything you have done," Sarah said, and hated how formal she sounded, how the words failed to capture the magnitude of what his help had meant. Jacob swung up into his saddle but did not immediately follow his crew who had already started toward Darlington. He sat looking down at Sarah, his expression uncertain in a way she had not seen before. "I am going to say something, and you can tell me to mind my own business if you want, but I think you should hear it anyway." Sarah waited, her heart hammering. "I have met a lot of people in my travels," Jacob said. "Good people, interesting people, people I like just fine. But I have never met anyone who made me want to stay before. You do, Sarah. You make me want to find a piece of land nearby to build my own place, to see where this connection between us might lead if we gave it time and attention. I know you value your independence, and I respect that. I am not asking you to give up anything you have worked for. I am just asking you to consider that maybe you do not have to do everything alone. Maybe two independent people could build something together that is stronger than what either could create separately." Sarah felt like the world had tilted beneath her feet. "You are offering to stay? To settle here?" "I am saying I want to explore that possibility," Jacob clarified, "if you are open to it. If not, I will respect your decision and ride on with my crew in a week. No hard feelings. No pressure. But I needed you to know that you have affected me, Sarah McKenna. You have made me reconsider what I want from my life." He did not wait for her answer, perhaps knowing she needed time to process such a declaration. He tipped his hat and turned his horse toward Darlington, leaving Sarah standing alone beside her half-built house, her mind spinning with possibilities she had not dared to imagine. The next few days passed in a blur of work and confused emotion. Sarah focused on installing floor joists, measuring and cutting and fitting each piece with meticulous care. The physical labor helped quiet her racing thoughts, though not entirely. Jacob's words played on repeat in her mind. He wanted to stay. He saw a future that included her. He was offering partnership without demanding she sacrifice her hard-won independence. On the third day after the frame raising, Sarah looked up from her work to find a rider approaching. Her heart jumped before she even registered the details, some instinct recognizing Jacob before her eyes confirmed his identity. He rode up and dismounted, carrying a wrapped bundle. "I thought you might want these," he said, offering the package. "Saw them in the Darlington General Store and thought of you?" Sarah unwrapped the bundle to find a set of quality carpenter's chisels, far better than the basic tools she had been using. "Jacob, I cannot accept these. They must have cost a fortune." "They are a gift," he said simply, "from someone who sees your skill and wants to support your work. Will you let me give you something without it being a debt or obligation?" Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth wooden handles, feeling the excellent balance of each tool. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I care about you," Jacob said. "Because watching you build this house with determination and skill is one of the most attractive things I have ever witnessed. Because I want to know you better, Sarah, and I am hoping you might want to know me better too." She set the chisels carefully aside and looked at him, really looked at him, letting herself see the sincerity in his face, the hope and uncertainty mixed there. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I have spent so long protecting myself, relying only on myself, that I do not know how to let someone in. What if I'm not good at it? What if I disappoint you or you disappoint me?" Jacob stepped closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Then we will figure it out together. Sarah, I am not asking for perfection or promises of forever right now. I am asking if you will spend time with me, let me court you properly, see if this thing between us is as real as it feels. Can you give me that chance? Can you give us that chance?" Sarah thought about the life she had planned, solitary and safe. Then she thought about Samuel's words around the fire, about 32 good years and no regrets. She thought about Jacob's mother, who had leaned on community and emerged stronger. She thought about the frame of her house, built with help freely given, standing tall because of collaboration rather than isolation. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff into open air, terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. "Yes, I would like that." The smile that broke across Jacob's face was radiant, and before Sarah fully processed what was happening, he had closed the distance between them and pulled her into an embrace. She stiffened initially, unaccustomed to such physical affection, but then she let herself relax into his arms, let herself feel the solid warmth of another human being holding her, supporting her, wanting her. "You will not regret this," Jacob murmured against her hair. "I promise I will respect your independence, support your dreams, and never try to diminish what you are building here." Sarah pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "I need to go slowly. I need time to adjust to sharing my life with someone." "We will go at whatever pace you need," Jacob assured her. "I am not going anywhere." Over the following weeks, Jacob proved true to his word. He visited Sarah's land daily, sometimes bringing his crew to help with construction tasks that required multiple hands, sometimes coming alone to simply spend time with her. He learned her rhythms and respected her need for solitary work time. He asked questions about her plans and listened with genuine interest to her answers. He shared stories of his own life, his family, his experiences on the trail, gradually painting a picture of who he was beyond their initial meeting. They fell into an easy pattern of working side by side during the day and talking long into the evening, sitting by the fire and sharing the kinds of conversations that build intimacy. Sarah learned that Jacob loved reading, that he carried a battered copy of Shakespeare's collected works in his saddlebag and could quote long passages from memory. He learned that Sarah played fiddle, though she had sold hers to help pay for timber, and he showed up one day with a used instrument he had found in a Darlington pawn shop, insisting she needed music in her life. The crew's planned week in Darlington stretched to 2, then 3. Jacob picked up work at a nearby ranch to pay his expenses, but it was clear to everyone that he was staying for Sarah. Red and Patrick eventually headed back to Texas, but Miguel decided to try his luck in Oklahoma Territory, and Thomas secured a position at Fort Reno. James signed on with the same ranch employing Jacob, and Samuel announced he was too old for trail driving anyway and might as well see if he could make a go of carpentry work in a growing territory. As August turned to September, the walls of Sarah's house began to rise. She had saved enough for lumber, and Samuel helped her with the more technical aspects of wall construction, while Jacob and James provided muscle for the heavy work. Miguel stopped by periodically with contributions of food from his new job at a local ranch, never making it seem like charity but simply neighborly sharing. Thomas brought news and gossip from the fort, keeping them connected to the wider world. Sarah found herself part of a community almost without realizing it was happening, her determined isolation giving way to the warmth of friendship and belonging. But the center of her new world was Jacob, whose presence had become as essential to her daily life as breathing. She noticed when he was near, felt his absence when he was not, found herself looking forward to his arrival each day with an eagerness that both delighted and frightened her. They had not spoken of love yet, had not moved beyond embraces and the occasional chaste kiss, but Sarah felt the emotion growing between them like a living thing, undeniable and transformative. She caught Jacob watching her sometimes with an expression of such tender affection that it made her chest ache. She knew her own face probably reflected the same feeling. One evening in late September, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Jacob reached for Sarah's hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I filed a claim today," he said quietly. 160 acres adjacent to your eastern boundary. The land office approved it. Sarah's breath caught. "You are really staying." "I am really staying," Jacob confirmed. "I want to build a life here, Sarah. I want to raise horses, maybe cattle, establish something permanent. And I want to do it near you, with you, if you will have me. I am not asking you to give up your land or your house or your independence. I am asking if maybe eventually we could build a future together, two separate people with our own strengths and dreams creating something bigger than ourselves." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but these were tears of joy rather than sorrow or exhaustion. "I love you," she said, the words emerging with startling clarity. "I did not think I wanted this, did not think I needed anyone. But I love you, Jacob Reeves. You have changed everything." "I love you too," Jacob said, and leaned in to kiss her. A kiss different from the tentative explorations they had shared before. This kiss was a promise, a claiming, a mutual declaration that they were choosing each other despite fear and uncertainty, choosing to build something together. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast and we can have a long engagement if you want, but marry me, Sarah. Let me be your partner in all things, your support and your champion. Let me love you for the rest of our lives." Sarah thought about all the reasons she should say no, should wait, should protect herself. Then she thought about how alive she felt when Jacob was near, how his respect and support had helped her grow stronger rather than weaker, how their partnership enhanced rather than diminished her capabilities. "Yes," she said, and laughed at the shocked delight on his face. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in early October by a traveling preacher who made regular circuits through Oklahoma Territory. The ceremony took place at Sarah's house, now complete enough to offer shelter even though interior work remained. Samuel gave Sarah away, tears streaming down his weathered face as he placed her hand in Jacob's. Miguel and Thomas stood as witnesses while James played a surprisingly skillful harmonica. Several neighboring homesteaders attended, including the Johnson family, who brought food and congratulations. Sarah wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, and Jacob had gotten his best shirt pressed at the Darlington laundry. They spoke their vows standing in front of the house Sarah had built, the house that represented her independence and capability, and Sarah felt no contradiction between promising her life to Jacob and maintaining the self-reliance she had fought so hard to establish. They were not merging into one person, but rather becoming partners, two whole individuals choosing to walk through life side by side. The wedding celebration was humble but joyful, full of music and laughter and abundant food contributed by everyone present. As evening fell and guests began departing, Jacob pulled Sarah aside, leading her away from the house toward the creek that ran through her property. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "A wedding gift." Sarah unfolded the document and had to read it twice before understanding. It was a deed, transferring ownership of Jacob's newly claimed land into both their names jointly. "Jacob, you cannot give me your land." "I am not giving it to you," he corrected. "I am making it ours, just like this land is ours now. I had your deed modified too, with your permission from the land office. Everything we have is shared, Sarah. We build our future together." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the gesture, by the absolute trust it represented. Jacob was not trying to take over her land or subsume her achievement. He was creating genuine partnership, recognizing that they were stronger together than apart. "I do not know what I did to deserve you," she whispered. "You were yourself," Jacob said simply. "Strong and determined and so damn brave, hauling that timber alone and refusing to give up on your dreams. You showed me what real courage looks like, Sarah. I am honored that you are letting me be part of your life." They stood by the creek as stars emerged overhead, wrapped in each other's arms, and Sarah felt something settle deep in her soul. Peace, she realized. She had found peace, not in isolation, but in connection. Not in protecting herself from disappointment, but in risking her heart on someone worthy of that risk. The first winter was hard, as winters in Oklahoma Territory often were. The house proved solid against the wind and cold, a testament to good planning and construction. Jacob began work on a barn on his portion of their joint property, while Sarah finished the interior of the house, adding a wood stove and shelving and all the small touches that turned a structure into a home. They worked their respective projects during the day and came together each evening, sharing meals and conversation and the growing intimacy of marriage. In the spring, Jacob purchased 3 mares and a stallion, beginning the horse breeding operation he had dreamed about. Sarah planted a large garden and took in sewing work from Fort Wives, building a small income stream. They helped each other with the heavy work, collaborated on decisions, but also respected each other's independence and areas of expertise. It was a delicate balance, but they navigated it with patience and communication. Samuel built himself a small cabin on the edge of their property, claiming he might as well stay where he was useful. He became like family, a grandfather figure who advised on construction projects and told stories that made them laugh. Miguel married a woman from Darlington and settled nearby with her family's blessing. Thomas visited regularly, bringing news and friendship. James eventually decided ranching was not his calling and moved to Kansas City to try his hand at business, but he wrote letters keeping them updated on his adventures. As their second year of marriage progressed, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had always assumed she would face life childless, had never imagined herself as a mother. But Jacob was thrilled, immediately beginning plans to expand the house to accommodate a growing family. "What if I am not good at this?" Sarah asked one evening, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if I am too independent, too used to solitude to be a good mother?" Jacob pulled her close, his hand covering hers. "You will be an excellent mother because you are strong and capable and full of love, even if you do not always show it easily. Our child will learn from you that determination matters, that hard work pays off, that being yourself is more important than fitting someone else's expectations. Those are valuable lessons. Their son was born in February of 1886, arriving during a snowstorm that prevented the doctor from reaching them until hours after the birth. Samuel helped Jacob deliver the baby, both men looking terrified and awed as they welcomed the squalling infant into the world. They named him Daniel, after Sarah's father, and from the moment she held him, Sarah understood a new dimension of love, fierce and protective and absolute. Motherhood changed her in ways she had not anticipated, softening some of her sharp edges while also intensifying her determination to build something lasting. She wanted Daniel to grow up with security and stability, wanted him to know the value of hard work, but also the importance of community and connection. She and Jacob discussed their values endlessly, working to create a childhood for their son that balanced independence with belonging. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, and they named her Ruth after Jacob's mother. She had Sarah's dark hair and Jacob's gray eyes, and from the beginning she displayed a stubborn determination that made both parents laugh in recognition. Watching Jacob with their children, seeing his patience and playfulness and unwavering support, Sarah fell in love with him over and over again. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Jacob's horses gained a reputation for quality, and buyers came from increasingly distant locations to purchase his stock. Sarah's sewing work expanded to include custom clothing orders, and she discovered a talent for design that brought in good income. They added rooms to the house as needed, each expansion planned and built together, a physical representation of their growing life. Samuel lived to see Daniel turn 10 and Ruth turn 8, passing peacefully in his sleep one autumn night. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Sarah played her fiddle at his funeral while Jacob and Miguel and Thomas lowered the coffin into the ground. It was a loss that hit them all hard, but especially Sarah, who had come to see Samuel as the father she had lost long ago. "He was proud of you," Jacob told her that night as they lay in bed holding each other through grief. "He told me once that watching you build your life from nothing gave him hope that good things were still possible in the world. You mattered to him, Sarah. You made his last years meaningful." The children grew, and Sarah marveled at their different personalities. Daniel was thoughtful and careful, drawn to books and learning like his father. Ruth was bold and adventurous, always climbing something or exploring new territory, her mother's fearlessness expressing itself in childhood curiosity. Sarah and Jacob worked to nurture each child's individual nature, while teaching them shared values of integrity and hard work and kindness. As the century turned toward its final decade, Oklahoma Territory continued to change and grow. Darlington expanded into a proper town with a school and church and multiple businesses. The fort remained active, and new settlers arrived regularly, filing claims and building lives. The wild edge of the frontier was gradually giving way to established civilization, and while Sarah sometimes missed the earlier openness, she appreciated the increased stability and opportunity for her children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised Sarah with a gift that made her cry. He had commissioned a sign for the ranch entrance, carved wood with elegant lettering that read McKenna Reeves Ranch, established 1884. When Sarah questioned why her name came first, Jacob smiled and said, "Because you were here first, building and planning and creating something from nothing. I just had the good fortune to find you and join what you started. This ranch exists because of your vision, Sarah. It should bear your name first." That evening, they sat on the porch of the house Sarah had planned and built, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. Daniel and Ruth played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The barn Jacob had built stood solid and square, housing a dozen quality horses. Fields of wheat rippled in the distance, planted and cultivated through their joint effort over the years. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked quietly. "Choosing this life with me instead of the independence you originally planned?" Sarah leaned against her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, the comfort of a decade of partnership and love. "I did not give up independence, she said. "I gained a partner who respects my strength while offering his own. This life is better than anything I imagined when I was hauling that timber alone. You have given me love and family and a future richer than I dared to dream. I regret nothing." "I love you," Jacob said, kissing her temple. "From that first day when you were too proud and stubborn to accept help easily, I loved your strength. 10 years later, I love you more than seems possible, and I will love you more tomorrow than today." As darkness settled over the prairie and stars emerged in their ancient patterns, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Oklahoma Territory alone and determined, ready to prove she needed no one. Instead, she had found someone worth needing, worth choosing, worth building a life alongside. The house she had planned in isolation had become a home filled with love and laughter. The land she had claimed as refuge from the world had transformed into a thriving ranch supporting not just her but an entire family. Years continued to pass, bringing the changes and challenges that mark any life. There were harsh winters and dry summers, sick children and lean times, losses and disappointments. But there were also triumphs and joys, moments of connection and beauty that made everything worthwhile. Sarah and Jacob navigated it all together, their partnership strengthened by time and shared experience. Daniel grew into a thoughtful young man who decided to pursue education back east, wanting to become a teacher. Sarah and Jacob supported his choice, despite knowing it meant he would likely settle far from the ranch. Ruth stayed close to home, falling in love with a neighboring rancher's son and eventually marrying him and claiming land adjoining the family property. 2 more children followed, sons born close together who kept Sarah and Jacob busy with the energy of youth. Miguel's family became intertwined with theirs through proximity and friendship, and several of his children married into neighboring families, creating a web of connection across the territory. Thomas eventually married as well, and his wife became one of Sarah's closest friends, another strong woman carving out a life in challenging circumstances. As Sarah entered her 50s, she began teaching young women the skills she had learned, sharing knowledge of construction and planning and self-reliance. She wanted other women to know they were capable of building lives on their own terms, whether that meant choosing independence or partnership or some combination of both. Her students came from across the territory, and Sarah took pride in watching them grow confident in their own capabilities. Jacob's hair turned silver, and he moved a bit slower than in his youth, but his love for Sarah never diminished. If anything, it deepened with the years, becoming something rich and complex and utterly essential to both their lives. They had built something remarkable together, a legacy not just of land and structures, but of love and family and community. On a warm evening in May of 1910, Sarah and Jacob sat on their porch watching the sunset over land they had worked for more than 25 years. Ruth was visiting with her 3 children, and the sounds of the grandchildren playing filled the air with joy. Daniel had come home from Boston with his wife and 2 daughters, and the house rang with the noise and chaos of a large family gathering. "We did well," Sarah said, reaching for Jacob's hand. "Look at what we created from that pile of timber and a foundation of stones. We built something that will outlast us, something meaningful and good." "You did well," Jacob corrected gently. "You had the vision and courage to start building when you were alone. I just had the privilege of joining you and helping raise the walls of the life you imagined. Everything we have flows from your strength and determination, Sarah." She turned to look at her husband, seeing the years written on his face, but also seeing the same gray eyes that had watched her with respect and admiration from their first meeting. "We did this together," she insisted. "I could not have built this life alone, Jacob. I did not want to once I met you. You taught me that accepting help is not weakness, that partnership can enhance rather than diminish, that love is worth the risk of loss. You changed my life in the best possible way." As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, their grandchildren ran up to the porch, begging for stories. Sarah and Jacob gathered the children close, and together they told the tale of how a determined woman hauled timber alone to build a house, and how a cowboy brought his crew and raised the frame fast, and how that beginning led to a love story that spanned decades and created a family and a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The youngest grandchild, barely 5 years old, looked up at Sarah with wide eyes. "But Grandma, were you scared when you were all alone?" Sarah considered the question, remembering that younger version of herself, so certain that isolation was safety. "Yes," she admitted. "I was scared of many things, but being scared did not stop me from doing what needed to be done. And then something wonderful happened. I learned that sometimes when you are brave enough to build your dreams, other people will show up to help you lift what is too heavy to raise alone. That is how your grandfather and I found each other, and how we built this life together." "Tell us about the house raising," one of the older grandchildren requested, and Jacob launched into the story, his voice warm with memory and affection. Sarah listened to her husband's familiar voice and looked out at the land they had cultivated, the barn and outbuildings they had constructed, the life they had built through decades of partnership and love. The house that had started as her solitary dream had become the foundation of something far larger than she had imagined possible. She had learned that strength did not require isolation, that independence could coexist with deep connection, that the best things in life were often built together rather than alone. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Sarah felt profound gratitude for the day Jacob Reeves had ridden up to her loaded wagon and offered help without expectation. That moment had changed everything, had opened doors she had not known existed, had led her to a life richer and fuller than anything she had dared to dream during those lonely days of hauling timber by herself. The children eventually grew tired and were shepherded off to bed by their parents, leaving Sarah and Jacob alone on the porch once more. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the prairie darkness settle around their home. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new moments to navigate together, but tonight they simply sat in the peace of a life well lived, a love well chosen, a partnership that had proven stronger than either of them could have built alone. "No regrets?" Jacob asked, the question that had become a touchstone for them over the years. "No regrets," Sarah confirmed, squeezing his hand. "Only gratitude for every moment, every choice, every challenge we faced together. You are the best decision I ever made, Jacob Reeves." "Right back at you, Sarah McKenna Reeves," Jacob said, and pulled her close for a kiss that still held the spark and promise of those early days while also carrying the depth and security of decades of shared life. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of growing things and the promise of seasons yet to come. Inside the house, the family they had created slept safe and warm. The frame Jacob and his crew had raised so many years ago still stood strong and true, testimony to solid construction and careful planning. But more than that, it stood as symbol of what becomes possible when independent strength meets generous partnership, when someone brave enough to build alone finds someone worthy of building together. Sarah McKenna had come to Oklahoma Territory to prove she needed no one. Instead, she had discovered that the strongest foundations are built not in isolation, but in connection, not by refusing help, but by accepting it with grace, not by standing alone, but by choosing to stand alongside someone who sees your strength and honors it while offering their own. The house she had planned as fortress against disappointment had become a home filled with love, and the life she had designed for solitude had transformed into a legacy of family and community that would echo forward through generations. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Sarah and Jacob remained on their porch, two people who had chosen each other across all the years and challenges, whose love had proven as solid and enduring as the house they had built together, whose partnership demonstrated that the best things in life are created when capable people join their strengths in common purpose, and whose story would be told and retold as testament to the transformative power of love that respects, supports, and celebrates rather than diminishes or controls. It was a good life, a life worth building, a life that began with timber hauled alone and a frame raised together and grew into something beautiful and lasting and true.